Hi there, welcome back to my YouTube channel. My name is Anita Adefuye, author of Reve-Healed, where I talk about my journey through child sexual abuse and how I came out on the other side. I'm also the founder of loudsilences.org, and this is where I educate people on the topic of sexual violence, mental health, depression, suicide. I also talk about just undoing the culture of silence around these topics. So in my last video, we were undoing the culture of silence on sexual violence, and this really came out of a blog post that we had on Loud Silences, where we had a true life story of a person who was almost raped by a priest at her church and what had happened. So if you haven't read that, I encourage you. Link is in the description. Go ahead and read the story, see what you can learn from it. When we share those stories, we often would also share nuggets and tips on what people can do better. But I just felt very strongly I needed to do this video to also talk about, what the church can do, how we can set things in place to prevent sexual violence. There's a lot of ask on us, and we have a lot of work to do. And so in last week's video, we talked about 5 things. We're talking about 10 things the church can do. We talked about the first 5 things, and today we're going to talk about the remaining 5 things. And just a quick recap, we talked about preaching about it from our pulpits. We talked about naming things like violence and assault in our prayers, praying for people who we know. You don't have to mention their names, by the way. If I didn't mention that in the last video, you don't have to mention names, just to say if anyone is going through this. God knows their names, He knows where they are at, and He will definitely show up for them. But you have a chance to stand in the gap and pray for them. Number 3, we talked about educating our church, our children, handlers about sexual violence and abuse, what it is, what it does to people. All right. And we also talked about teaching about consent and boundaries. We talked about teaching boundaries to the adults as well. Set boundaries around the children, help them set boundaries, and when they tell you to respect their boundaries, respect their boundaries. All right, they're children, but they still have a voice. And then we also talked about teaching boundaries and consent to our youth. Again, it wasn't that we're saying go and have sex because if you're married, but it's to say that people sometimes don't always listen. Whatever happens, at least they should be. It shouldn't be because they lacked knowledge. So those are the 5 things that we talked about. And today we're going to continue and talk about the remaining 5 parts. So this is part 2. And without much ado, I'm just going to hit on number 6, I guess. So number 6, we should have more women on the pulpit. Now, a lot of churches are doing better. And in today's world, we're talking about representation. The church is not left out of this, because the truth is that there are a lot of women who, even in the Bible and through the Christian history, have done so much. But there's also something about a woman and the touch of a woman, right? That there is that dynamic. It's just different, all right? It's different. Now, I'm not saying in the name of just putting women on pulpit, throw any woman on pulpit. No. Some people have the call of God on their lives. What are we doing to help them embrace that call and walk in it? Right. And then there's something about when a woman also is on the pulpit, there's that maternal feel. Right. Now, not to say that women don't abuse people. They do. Unfortunately, they do. And there are statistics to prove that they do. However, the ratio compared to men is different. I don't have that ratio right now. If I find it, maybe I'll do a quick short video to just talk about it. And maybe one of these days I really will talk about some of the statistics around this topic so that we'll see how bad it really is. And maybe that would inspire some of us to step up a little bit more. We need more people to step up and start talking about these things. All right, but there is something about the dynamic of a woman. I think about someone like Deborah, for instance, right? Deborah was a woman who, the Bible talks about the fact that, Israel was in so much chaos and bondage until there arose Deborah, or at least she said that of herself, if she does say so herself. So there's something to be said about more women on pulpits, and a woman might typically be more comfortable even talking about things like depression, mental health, suicide than more men might be, just given, again, the dynamic. It shouldn't be, but given the dynamic. So more women on pulpits, and, if they're more comfortable talking about these topics, then let them have the stage to talk about it, please. So, but there's also something about that as more women show up to pulpit, other women start to look at themselves and they can see what they can become too. Right? And that in itself can trigger more people to start to really lean into their God-given plans and purposes. So number 7 is that encourage people to report abuses. And when they do, believe them and support them. So put things in place that encourage people to show up. if anything happens, even the minutest of things, you want to make sure from children level to adults, what are some mechanisms you have in place? What are some ways? If you need to drop like an anonymous number to say, you can drop reports, cases of incidents of sexual abuse or perceived sexual abuse here, right? And then you want to make sure that you have ways and people who can do the work of investigating it, and then put those things in place. What are ways that people can report them if anything happens? I think about the story that was shared. I can't help but wonder if it was a church where those things were in place, would she have reported? Maybe she would have, right? But if it is a church where maybe even if it's been reported, and it's one thing for people to report, it's another thing for people to actually do something about it when they report. And if people see that you handle it poorly, the chances are they won't come out to report anything anymore. But if they see that you took steps that at least seem fair and investigated and did the right things and then supported the person, you'll probably see more people come up if there are issues that happen, right? So believe them, support them, but put those mechanisms in place where they can come out, and don't shame them if they do. I'll leave it at that. Number eight, I would say that have resources available. So there are several things. There are preventive resources you can have available to your teachers, to your workers, or whatever. There are resources you can have if somebody, were to experience an abuse, or resources you can have on how people can report cases. But then there's also resources you can have. There might be people who come to you and they've already experienced that abuse somewhere else. But then they come to you, right? And when they come to you, they're still searching for wholeness in their souls. You might have something that helps them, and that would be great. Whether it's even in the topic of mental health, divorce, domestic abuse, sexual abuse, child sexual abuse, whatever the case is, have resources available. Again, this is where even things like the training comes in. Sometimes the resources can also be people, all right? It can also be people. Do you have counselors in place, for instance, that people can run to if they have any concerns and talk to? So have those kinds of resources in place. Make them known. Make people know where they can find those resources. Peradventure they need it. Our prayer is always that nobody needs it because nothing happens, right? That's the prayer. But peradventure someone does, please, better to have them and nobody needs it than not have it and then somebody needs it. Okay. So number 9. Number 9, do background checks. As a matter of fact, by law, you cannot work with minors. You cannot work with vulnerable people if you don't have background checks. Even for our everyday jobs. Excuse me. Even for our everyday jobs, we do background checks, right? Now, if people come in, do background checks. Not only do background checks. Now, this one, some people will not be happy with the next thing I'm about to say. Do background checks and apply a 3 to 6 month waiting period before people can work with kids in your church. You want to, now you will never know them completely and their intents, right? But you also want to make sure that you're observing them, you're getting to know them. I cringe if somebody I don't know, brand new, shows up to church and start working with my kids. I will cringe at that. Now, I met them there and I am the newbie. It's a different case. But that one moment there's a brand new face at church working with children. They started service 3 weeks ago. I don't think that's right. That's my opinion. But yeah, I think that there should be some wait period. Now, there are people who maybe that's what they've been doing in their previous churches. They might even come with a recommendation letter. Those are not the ones we're talking about, right? But people who, and even if that's the case, then I would say reach out. Part of the background check is the due diligence of you call up the pastors of the church where they were. How was this person working with children? Because we don't want any issues. These are children. We don't want any issues. Even with teenagers, we don't want any issues. Before you can say people can, spend time with children outside of their parents, do background checks, please. There are criminal record checks that needs to be done, and then do your due diligence of background check. Call people, ask questions. And to get a more balanced view, of course, you're asking more than one person. So maybe ask them to even provide you references that you can call. but we need to do our due diligence. We owe it to these children. Number 10, and finally, encourage people to share their story. There is power in a story. For me personally, when I look at, I used to think of myself as an outcast. Honestly, to be truthful with you, if I'm being honest, there are a lot of times I look at church settings as a whole, and sometimes I honestly still feel like an outcast. I don't look like certain ways that they say people should be looking. I don't speak Christianese, and I don't plan to. But I remember after I came out and shared my story, and since I've been blogging and YouTubing and all of that, I find that people are more comfortable talking to me about certain experiences than they will typically go to anybody else. And I don't take that for granted, because there is power in a story. You see a lot of all those smiling faces, those beautiful, handsome faces. You don't know what's beneath it. When people sometimes start to tell you their stories, you'll be amazed. I know many strong people who have been through things. Thank God nobody looks like what they've been through. That's the beauty. Nobody looks like what they've been through. And so when people hear your story, and sometimes even if we're not sure what to preach from the pulpit, call someone up to say, come and share your story. How did God help you? Let it be a testimony. It is a testimony. Do you know what it means to go through sexual abuse, rape, molestation, and come out on the other side? Man, this thing messes people up. I would know, I've been there. But when people share their stories, when they share how they struggled, and then they share how God helped them to come out of it, and share the things that helped them come out of it, you'll be amazed at how a lot of people come to church and sometimes there's no relatability. When you share those stories, you're giving people something to relate to. Somebody else might be in that crowd. They've never been through child sexual abuse, but maybe they've been through some experiences, and then they hear their story and they're like, and I'm here thinking I had it worse. This is what had nothing to do with sexual abuse, but quick story. I remember when I first came to Canada, I was working in McDonald's. And I remember one day I was pouting at church. I was so angry. And I was thinking in my mind, like, hold me, a diplomat of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. I'm here in this land and I'm working in McDonald's. Like, what nonsense? And I was so pissed. I remember saying in my mind, God, I'm not praising you today. It was a Thanksgiving Sunday. I sat down at the back. My hands were folded in defiance. And I said, I'm not praising you today, no matter what. McDonald's, what nonsense. And that was my mindset. And it was testimony time. And I remember one of our ministers, who is a doctor, came out. And then he was sharing his testimony and thanking God for his story. And then he talked about how, when he first came to this land, nobody would hire him. And I was still there listening, but I was saying in my mind, like, of course, nobody would hire you. Nobody will give you doctor money. But of course, I'm sure they hired you. Somebody somewhere hired you, a doctor. Who would not hire a doctor? And then I heard him say, even McDonald's would not hire me. Man, I sat up. Talk about the power of a story. I sat up and I heard a doctor with a medical will not be hired by McDonald's. And he didn't just have his, whatever they call, I don't know what they call them, bachelor's in medicine, whatever it is. He had like the next level. I don't think they do masters, but whatever a master's equivalent is for a doctor. And he said, even McDonald's won't hire me. And when Walmart eventually managed to hire him, they said, go and work in the back because of your accent. That story right there was everything the pastor preached that day. It did not enter because I was in defiance against God that day. So that's the power of a story. Someone comes out to say, when I was 5 years old, I was molested. And this happened and that happened. And I was mad at God and I was this and I was that. And I remember somebody said to me when I was doing my book launch in Nigeria, that, lately I've been doubting God's existence because I asked God for specific things and He didn't give to me. And then I'm reading your story and I'm thinking, if it was me, I've given up on God a long time ago. And then I'm hearing you talk about God in your story and I'm like, I don't get. And she said, I realized now that I had baby faith. I tried to see God as a transaction. Give me something. How do you go through this? And somehow your faith in God is more strengthened because of this. I don't get it. But whatever it is, I'm determined to go find it. Power of a story. You don't know how to bring it to the pulpit, get people to start sharing their stories. If you need to teach them, how to frame it in a way that it's testimonial, then do it. So let's encourage people to tell their story and how God helped them through it. And you'll be shocked at how many more people would experience freedom just from that. So I really hope that these tips really help us. Church, look, I love God, as I'm sure many of us do. And I want us all together as a family to kick this thing to the curb. And we can. This thing should not be heard in our midst. It shouldn't be. And when people who have been broken need somewhere to go, we should be their first choice. And dare I say, their only choice. Not we because it's us, but the God in us. Because we can. And this is part of the calling that God has called all of us to. People tell me I'm called to do this. I don't know about that. But I think we're all called to do it. And I know that we can if we put our minds to it. Again, I really hope that you share these with your pastors. Personally, honestly, I've had some churches call me to share my story in their church. And it's been a very powerful experience. I'm happy to. I don't charge churches for speaking fees, anything. But I'm not doing this for anything. But just to help people get free. Period. All right? Some of the places I've even been to, I didn't even ask for it. They called me and said, look, we think that people need to hear things like this. And that gladdens my heart because people really do need to hear things like this. So I'm happy to share my story. If you don't even want to invite me, share my videos. Buy my books and give to people. That's more than enough. The whole story is out there. It is there. I had nothing. Some people have bought the book. They haven't read it. I hid nothing. Unfortunately, one of my molesters was my own father. That's not hidden story anymore. It's out there in the open. And I'm happy to talk about it. Not because I'm happy that it happened. But if that's what helps someone get free, what am I hiding it for? I am free and I want others free. And that's what's important. But as a body of Christ, we have a lot of work to do. And I want to see us get to it. So, thank you once again for watching till the end. And I really hope that this blesses someone. This helps someone. Please, again, share to all your ministers. Share to all your ministers. I feel a strong, burden in my spirit that we need to start having these kinds of conversations. Not to shame anybody. Not to make anybody feel less than. But to actually pull people out of married clays that they find themselves in. Thank you so much. Well, enjoy the rest of your day or night or morning, whatever it is, or whatever time you're watching this. And I hope to see you in my next video. My name is Anita once again. Take care and bye.